So the first thing we need to do is set up our sketchbook page. So go ahead and write Monochromatic value scale at the top. And then down below at the bottom, draw a long rectangle and break it up into 5 boxes. Go ahead and number those boxes 1 through 5. Above number 3, write pure hue. Over number 1, write more white, and over 5, more black. So make sure you've got your paper towel and your water ready. Get your brush wet, tap off the excess water, and we're going to start with the pure hue. Now that means the color straight out of the tube, the one color right in the middle that you're going to be working with. So get your brush saturated with the blue paint right out of the tube and fill in that number 3 value. So that value is the mid tone. It's right in the center. Wash off your brush, get the excess water off, and now we're going to go into number 2. Now that means we're adding some white. So take a nice scoop of blue. Make sure you wash your brush before you go into the white so that you don't pollute it. Take a nice scoop of white and then mix them together thoroughly. And then go ahead and fill in number 2. So it's going to be your second value, your lighter mid-tone. Wash your brush, get the excess off, and we're going to go right into number 1 value. That means the lightest one, so just go ahead and add a lot more white. Mix it up real well. Sometimes you'll find yourself having to get more to lighten it up, but it should be noticeably lighter than your number 2. So go ahead and fill in your number 1 value. So that's going to be for the brightest highlights. Wash your brush, get the excess off, and now we're going to move into our number 4. That means we're adding black. So get your pile of blue, wash your brush in between, take just the tiniest touch of black. Go ahead and mix them up thoroughly. And fill in your number 4. In my opinion, I made my number 4 a little bit too dark. Now moving into number 5, just going to use more black. Go ahead and mix that on in and fill in your number 5 box. That is your darkest value. Wash your brush, dry it off, and now we need to transfer our portrait using oil pastels. So go ahead and grab a light color. I do not recommend light green though, it's hard to see. I'm using orange, which works pretty well. And go ahead and completely cover the back. You want to make sure that you are pressing with decent pressure. Use 2 fingers to hold down the picture. Make sure that you do not move the picture while you are doing this. So go ahead and take your pencil, trace around the lightest values, wherever you see those bright highlights on the face. And you could just see there that I was checking my progress, so the oil pastel will transfer onto the paper wherever you press with your pencil. So just keep going around all of those bright highlights, usually on the upper lip, the chin, the nose, eyebrows, and check your progress. So now we're going to go into finding our lighter midtones. Now it kind of looks like I'm tracing a shape around that triangle above her eyebrow. I'm actually technically tracing the shape inside of that, if that makes sense. So those areas of her face where it's not the lightest, but it's almost the lightest. Go ahead and trace shapes around those. You can kind of see my process here. I'm finding those almost bright, but not quite the brightest shapes and mapping those out by just tracing closed shapes around them. A lot of the face is going to be falling into that number 2 value category, that midtone. So then once you've done that, go ahead and find those number 3 values. So they're kind of in between light and dark, not too light, not too dark. Moving on to number 4. So our almost the darkest but not quite the darkest shapes. Go ahead and draw shapes around those with your mapping. And then finally, we are tracing the darkest values on the face. Really important, make sure you get the eyelashes. Make sure you get the eyebrows. Don't forget about all the parts of the lip where the lip splits. And then in that nose area as well. And then, very important, don't forget the pupils, the irises. And then, of course, the hair. Check your progress first, make sure everything looks good. And if it all looks great, you can go ahead and pick up your portrait. So go ahead and begin putting numbers in all of the values. So whichever shapes that were the very lightest, those number 1 shapes, go ahead and write a little number 1 in those shapes. And same for the number 2s. Just referring back to your portrait that you traced, looking at those shapes that you drew around, what number corresponding to the value scale would that shape fall in? So go ahead and number your entire portrait. If you accidentally miss a shape, you can always see it later while you're painting and go ahead and refer back to the portrait to figure out what value number it would be. Don't forget to get those lips as well. Easy to forget because there's a lot of different gradients within them. So now we are ready to start filling in with color. So go ahead and wet your brush, tap off the excess. I feel like it's easiest to start with the lightest values, so go ahead and get your blue and make sure you wash your brush before going into the white. So I made a little mistake there, but it's okay. Go ahead and mix up your lightest value, compare it to what you have on your value scale to make sure that it matches. So go ahead and fill in all of those number 1 shapes. This is where you're basically just doing paint by numbers. That's why it's so great to have that value scale already made, so that way you can just check to make sure that the colors that you're mixing are just about the same. Make sure you get those eyes, and then go ahead and fill in your number 2 shapes. Here I see I'm washing off my brush before I am going into the whites. And just make sure that it matches up with your value scale and go ahead and fill in those number 2 shapes. You'll find yourself probably having to mix more paint because I didn't make enough the first time around. It's okay, that's why you got the value scale to refer to. Make sure you mix enough paint before you start so that you don't have to stop all the time in the middle. So now we're going to go into that middle of the value scale tone, that pure hue blue right out of the tube. So just start filling in those number 3 shapes. Going into our number 4. So get that little pile of blue, get the little teeny touch of black, go ahead and mix them up, and don't forget to check next to your value scale to make sure that it's the right color. If not, just add a little bit more black. Start filling in those shadows. Don't forget to refer back to your portrait often that you were copying from, because you might find that you missed mapping, drawing a shape around a value that was darker or lighter. So just don't forget to check. Because you can see I'm kind of realizing like, oh, I forgot to map those number 1s and 2s, so I'm kind of just going back and backtracking a little bit, making sure I get those filled in along the way. You really want to make sure that your shapes are touching. And then I'm just going back in after taking that little pause and finishing those number 4 values. Don't forget the ears, by the way. Those are pretty easy to forget. And lastly, I am just making my darkest shadow. And going in there and filling in those darker values, those number 5 shapes. So just check to make sure that you filled in all of the values. So go back and fill in some of those lighter ones. And then I am filling in the hair last but not least. So just check to make sure everything looks good. Add in some finishing touches. If you're realizing, looking at your original portrait, that you are missing something, you can just go on in there and start cleaning those up. Don't forget the light in the eyes as well, and on the top of the lips. And you are basically all set. So just looking over our rubric here, just make sure you've got these things. So make sure you've got your 5-step numbered value scale, all filled in with your mixed paint. Make sure you have your celebrity portrait transferred with pastel. Make sure that you have values in your portrait that correspond with the values on the value scale. So you are checking your paint that you mix to make sure that it matches the value scale, and then make sure that you give care and attention to the application of paint. So think about craftsmanship. Thanks guys for watching, and good luck with your monochromatic celebrity portraits.